Merab Dvalishvili has just beaten Sean O'Malley once again in a fight that many people thought would be a lot closer than the first fight, including myself. Merab actually ended up submitting Sean O'Malley. This decision machine came out with an incredible third round finish of Sean O'Malley. So in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at 5 things we learned from this UFC 316 main event. If you've not seen this style of video before, I put up these 5 blank boxes, and as we go through the video, we take a look at one thing at a time that we learned from this fight, including if there was anything that surprised us in this fight, if any of our suspicions were confirmed, and what's next for both fighters. So make sure you stick around to the end of the video as we take a look at this UFC 316 main event. Hello guys, and welcome back to Alex on MMA. Before we dive into the 5 things that we did learn from this fight, I want to do a quick recap of the fight itself because I think it is deserving of it. I don't know about you, but when the cage door closed and Jason Herzog got the fight underway, I was really pumped for this one. I do feel as though, I know it's a popular narrative at the moment, but we have been starved of these exciting matchups. And whether or not you think that O'Malley deserved the rematch, it certainly had that big fight feel. And let me know what you guys think about the reception both of these fighters got. Because if you believe what you read on the internet, Merab's popularity was meant to be soaring. People weren't so sure about O'Malley anymore. But it just goes to show that the stuff you read on X or anything like that, it doesn't really translate into reality. Because the pop that O'Malley got was something else. Merab, he got quite a mixed reaction. I know he got some big cheers at the end. But even though it's in Merab's home state, O'Malley was definitely the more popular fighter. But anyway, into the fight itself. So the first round was very interesting. I actually draw a lot of parallels from this fight with the first fight. I know that if you're just looking at it on a surface level, it might look quite different, but I think it was very similar. In that first round, O'Malley was clearly targeting the body more. In the first fight, where he was landing upstairs with a jab, he was going to the body more. He was using that teep to the body that had a lot of success in the 5th round. But then Merab got his hands on him. And when Merab took him down, if you look back, I'm not sure if I've got screenshots yet of last night's fight, but it was exactly the same takedown that he hit O'Malley with in the first fight in the first round. So the first takedown that Merab got on Sean O'Malley in this fight is exactly the same as the first takedown he got on O'Malley in their first fight as well. Just an interesting parallel there. But the first round was extremely similar, apart from the obvious targeting by O'Malley, going for that body to try and slow down Merab instead of headhunting. So it was a very close round. You could have given it either way. I don't think there was a clear winner. Then the second round was really interesting for me because in that first fight, this was where Merab really started to take over. And in this second fight, this second round was a hell of a lot more competitive. You could see the improvements that O'Malley had made to his takedown defense. He was really slipping out of these things. I'm not sure if he was greased up or not, but it seemed as though he was easily able to slip his leg out of some pretty tricky positions. Even when he was held up against the fence, his takedown defense was really solid. The advice that Tim Welsh was giving him between rounds seemed to be paying dividends here, so I was really impressed with that. However, on the flip side here, in this second round, he was getting caught by a lot of shots from Merab, and we're going to be getting onto that very shortly in the 5 things that we learned. So the second round, again, very competitive. You could have given it either way. Both fighters had their moments. Very close round. And then the third round. I think this was possibly the best round I've ever seen from Merab Dvalishvili. Even though O'Malley had been having some success, he'd been getting through to Merab's body. In that third round, Merab just took over, taking down O'Malley multiple times. Not just taking him down, but making it look easy, lifting him up, throwing him onto the ground. You could see the fight leaving O'Malley's face. And then when he cinched up that choke, the ninja choke or north-south Ezekiel, it just goes to show that all that talk ahead of the fight from Merab, saying that he was looking for a finish, it was actually true. He wanted to make more of a statement this time round, and he delivered in that third round. Like I said, I think that was the best round I've ever seen from Merab, and there's been a lot of good rounds. But anyway, it's time to get into the 5 things that we learned from this fight. So let's bring up those 5 blank boxes. And the first thing that we learned is that Sean O'Malley's claim to only have focused on grappling in this camp, it seemed to be true because his takedown defense was markedly better. Now, a lot of the narrative heading into this fight was talking about his hip injury in the first fight, how that inhibited his movement in terms of his wrestling defense. He wasn't able to sprawl, didn't have the mobility to get out of position. And if you're just comparing the two performances, O'Malley does seem to have a point here. He was a lot more mobile, he was throwing a lot more kicks, especially early on in the fight, and he showed a lot of hip dexterity to get out of some really tricky positions when Merab had him held up against the fence, or when he was able to lift one of his legs up in the air. So I do think that based on O'Malley's performance in the first 2 rounds, that hip injury was a real inhibitor in his first fight, and the recovery of that did contribute to better takedown defense in the second fight. But overall, not just putting it down to injury, the takedown defense and game planning was definitely something that Sean O'Malley had worked on with Tim Welsh. He just looked a lot better. He looked a lot more comfortable when he was put in those positions. And interestingly enough, in the first round, when Merab got those takedowns, O'Malley wasted absolutely no time getting back to his feet. On the other hand, both O'Malley and Tim Welsh seemed to have a plan for when Merab did take him down in the middle of the octagon, and this was to look for the triangle. Now, as much as I'm praising O'Malley for his takedown defense when he was pushed up against the fence and Merab was able to grab one of his legs, I wasn't so sure about his triangle attempts, just because they never really seemed to be on. When Merab got him down in the centre of the octagon and was pressuring forward, you could see O'Malley looking to tuck one of his arms in and try and throw up that triangle. But that just never seemed to be on. Merab's just too active. He doesn't hesitate when he's in that top position, even if it's just to show the referee that he's not stalling. He's always throwing something, even if they're shots with not a lot of malice on them. They're not very vindictive shots, but they're enough to not allow O'Malley to grab an arm, try and stuff it and get that triangle. So I wasn't too sure why O'Malley persisted with that triangle when it clearly wasn't working early on. He was able to get back onto his feet by turning, almost giving up his back to Merab, and then getting onto his knees and standing from that position. Although Merab was able to finish this fight with a submission, he isn't known for his submissions. He's not known for his back attacks, back control, unlike his teammate Aljamain Sterling. So I do think that O'Malley probably, in hindsight, should have done that earlier on, giving up his back in that position, because Merab just wants to get that body lock rather than sinking the hooks in and try and control him from the back. But anyway, the first thing that we learned is that clearly Sean O'Malley had been working on his grappling. His takedown defense looked very improved in the first couple of rounds. And even though his game plan was questionable by throwing up that triangle, at least he was working on game plans. He was thinking of different stuff, even if it didn't pay off in the end. However, there is a flip side to O'Malley's focus on grappling in this camp, and that leads into the second thing that we learned. So clearly he'd focused on grappling. He said that he was purely focusing on grappling in this camp. But that leads me to the fact that his striking didn't look quite as sharp, quite as crisp. And even though he did have success in the first and second rounds, there was a few things that you normally associate with Sean O'Malley, like the slick in and out movement and the head movement, and just the generally good positioning of himself when he's striking, that just wasn't there. So the second thing that we learned is that it was pretty clear that O'Malley's focus had been on the grappling rather than the striking in the build-up to this camp. Even though O'Malley's a more natural striker, you need to continuously be working on your strengths, polishing the better aspects of your game rather than neglecting them in camps, because it will show in fights, and it seems to show in fights here. Because as you saw in that first round and second round, when O'Malley was throwing shots to the body, which was clearly part of his game plan, he was getting tagged over and over again by that right hand. As he launched these shots into the body, his hands came down, and Merab it was too easy for Merab to connect on him. And these shots, they weren't the most powerful shots from Merab, but they really seemed to get a reaction. And then it was the way in which O'Malley reacted to that shot. He backed up with his chin in the sky, and that often led Merab able to get off the second shot and the third shot in that combination. So even though O'Malley was getting some good shots off of his own, this stand-up fight, which you thought would lean in O'Malley's favour most of the time, it was really 50-50. You can't look back at those first 2 rounds and say that O'Malley was dominating on the feet, because it's just not true. O'Malley was getting off single shots, whether it was the teep to the body or a jab or a right hand to the body, and it was actually Merab who was countering with the combinations. O'Malley's supposed to be the counter fighter here, and he just didn't look as slick. You know, I've said it before in the build to this fight, But the way in which he was able to get Aljamain Sterling out of there, when Sterling was just roaming forward, trying to put something on O'Malley, O'Malley just stepped out of the way and countered him. Where was that O'Malley in this fight? He just didn't seem to be there. So even though his grappling was definitely improved, the second thing that we learnt in this fight is that if you're not focusing on your strengths of your game, they will deteriorate, they will perish over time. You need to constantly be training on them. And yes, it's a bit of conjecture from me because I don't know the ins and outs of Sean O'Malley's training camp. Was he just saying that he was purely focusing on grappling? But if you look based on that performance and the success that Merab was having, yes, I'm sure that Merab had improved his striking game as well, but not to the extent that we saw there. Merab could be training for 3-4 more years purely on striking, and you'd still give the advantage to O'Malley. He just has that natural instinct, but something was just off about his striking. He seemed a little bit lazy getting out of position. When he did land something on Merab, Merab was able to counter him. So overall, the second thing that we learned in this fight is that Sean O'Malley's striking wasn't up to his normal high standard. In fact, it seemed to have taken a bit of a backstep from his last fight. Again, if you just watch this fight and you think that the success that O'Malley was having in rounds 1 and 2 were great, don't forget he had success in the first fight against Merab. I just don't think he was as crisp in this one. And let's move on to the third thing that we learned in this fight. And it's all about the mental toughness of Merab Dvalishvili. We've said it before, this isn't going to surprise you. It's more of confirming the suspicions or the knowledge we had beforehand. But Merab Dvalishvili, he is just unbreakable, unstoppable. That's what I've put in the title of this video. I'm just in awe of Merab's sheer grit and determination. He's all about the hard work and discipline, and that really translates in the fights. You can see that O'Malley came out a slightly different fighter in this one. Gave Merab a few different things to think about with the body and stuff like that. And especially when Merab wasn't having success early on getting the takedowns. Lesser fighters than Merab, their heads might drop. They might think, okay, I've got to keep this standing. We've seen it so many times before when wrestlers fight each other and they're not too confident about getting the takedown on the other one, that they just give up the best part of their game and focus on striking. Whereas Merab doesn't do that. He's so focused. He's got those blinkers on. He knows what his game plan is. He's so strong-willed, strong-minded when it comes to executing his game plan that he knows even if he can't get you down early, when it's meant to be some of the easiest time to get you down before you get slippy, before both fighters get tired, Merab is just so strong-minded. His mindset is just unbreakable. He knows that eventually he's going to get to you. After that first and second round, it was really close. No one really saw that third round coming, but I think it was more of a testament to Merab's will, as much of a testament to Merab's will as his skill set, that he was able to put on the third round that we saw. So the third thing that we did learn in this fight, or the third thing that we were reminded of in this fight, is just Merab's unbreakable will. Even if stuff isn't going perfectly to plan in the first 2 rounds. Yes, he did get the takedown. O'Malley got back up to his feet. O'Malley started landing some nice shots to the body. Merab just knew he can hang with this version of Sean O'Malley on the feet. He knows that eventually the tide will turn. And just having that knowledge, having that mindset, is like another weapon for Merab, because you can draw similarities to the Umar Nurmagomedov fight. In those first 2 rounds, Umar was actually having a lot more success in that fight than O'Malley was in this one. Umar was getting some great strikes off on Merab Dvalishvili. However, Merab just knows, eventually I'm going to get to you. Eventually I'm going to be able to impose my will on you. And that's such a strength, it's such an attribute. And tell me a fighter in the bantamweight division who can compete with that. Because we're going to get onto as the fifth thing that we learned, who's next. We're going to take a look at that. But when you're just looking at the landscape of the bantamweight division, there might be fighters that are as skilled as Merab in certain areas, but no fighter knows how a fight's going to play out as much as Merab does. And that all comes down to his mindset. He knows he doesn't want to give up the first 2 rounds. You can see the way in which he fights. He's still striking. He's still going for the takedown. But even if he loses the first round, the second round, he knows that eventually he's going to get to you. And if he is adding a submission threat to his game as well, then he's just going to be such a difficult champion to beat. He's proving that, this 13-fight win streak that he's on now. And it doesn't look as though it's ending anytime soon. So to recap, the third thing that we did learn in this fight is that Merab just has this unbreakable will, this ridiculously strong mindset that fights will work out in his favour. And it's such a great weapon for him to have. Just before we move on to the fourth thing that we did learn, if you are enjoying this video, I do these recaps for all the big UFC fights, be it a main event, a co-main event. Do subscribe to the channel. Comment below, what did you learn from this fight, Merab against Sean O'Malley 2? Because I feel as though this was one of those fights where we learned quite a lot about both fighters. And with that being said, let's move on to the fourth thing that we learned. And this is pretty epic. The decision machine that is Merab Dvalishvili. Is he now a genuine submission threat? Is he a finisher? Is he adding this string to his bow? The fourth thing that we learned is that third round of this fight is possibly the best round of Merab Dvalishvili's career. It demonstrated everything he does well from a defensive standpoint, an offensive standpoint, and now a finishing standpoint. So in the previous point I made, I was talking about the strong will and the mindset of Merab. And that really seemed to come through in this third round. And more to the point, he seemed to break the will of Sean O'Malley. I'm not sure if it was after the second takedown or the third takedown in succession, but you just saw that look in O'Malley's eyes. I'm not saying that he was looking for a way out. I do think that O'Malley's toughness is actually underrated. But I just think he was a bit lost. He didn't know what to do. Because every time he was applying his great takedown defense, getting back to his feet, it almost played into Merab's hands, because Merab's top control generally isn't the best. It's not his best weapon. But when O'Malley got back to his feet, he was just put straight back down on his back. Not only does this mentally fatigue you, it physically exhausts you, because you're having to get this guy, push his hands off, get back to your knees and stand up with his weight on you. So all the fight just seemed to be draining out of O'Malley. So from that perspective, it was an incredible round for Merab. The takedowns, the continuous takedowns, that was another example of what Merab does best. We just mentioned his top control not being his strongest point. He almost allows fighters to get back into some position, be it onto one knee with a hand on the mat or something like that. You see he'll always do that knee to the thigh whilst driving you against the fence. He almost lets the opponent stand up sometimes, just to take them back down, to fatigue them even more, because he knows that he's not getting tired. Another example of Merab being at his very brilliant best. And then the finish. And I'm not sure what the odds were for a Merab Dvalishvili submission win in this fight, but I bet they were pretty good. I think it just got to the point where Merab was having such success. O'Malley did look kind of lost. Maybe his defense, well, clearly his defense on the ground wasn't as good as it should have been. And Merab just saw an opportunity to cinch up his neck. This is a nasty submission, that Ezekiel from north-south. You could see how tight it was, a crank and a choke at the same time. And O'Malley, he did tap fairly quick, but I just think Merab had him in a horrible position. You can imagine that this is one of the few submissions that Merab probably does drill when he's training, and he just cinched it on. And could this be a pattern that we're going to see repeated in Merab's career? We're going to talk very shortly about who he'll be fighting next. But if he can add the submission threat from the top position to his game, this could be such a vital string to add to his bow, and at such an important time for his career as well. Because before this fight, at least, Merab was clearly a decision fighter. You just need to look at his record. And by definition, the longer you fight as a decision fighter, the more likely it is that you lose, purely because of the amount of time you're spending in the octagon. It's just more likely that the opponent either finds your chin or submits you himself. So if Merab is able to add a couple of submission threats from top position, I know that he did have a potential arm triangle in the second round, I think it was, where O'Malley's arm was across his chest, and Merab just didn't seem interested in that. So you could be forgiven in not expecting a submission here. But then in that third round, as soon as his neck became available, Merab, he didn't hesitate, did he? He just cinched it on and got the finish that way. So if Merab is able to add a new dimension to his game as the champion, not only is that ridiculously impressive, because it's showing that Merab is still focused on improving, focused on getting better as a fighter, he's not resting on his laurels, it also makes me question even more who the hell can beat this guy. So the fourth thing that we learned in this fight is that third round demonstrated everything that's great about Merab, and even something that we haven't seen before. What a round. As we move on to the fifth and final thing that we learned in this fight, and it's who's next. And I've got a version of events that I'd quite like to see, but it appears as though Corey Sandhagen is going to be next. He was there ringside. The camera went straight to him when Joe Rogan was asking Merab about who he wanted next. And look, it seems as though the build-up to that fight is going to be very respectful. Merab said so much himself. He said that he really respects Corey Sandhagen. It's somebody that he'd want to fight. And if I'm being totally honest, I really do like Corey Sandhagen, but I can completely understand why Merab would want to fight him. Firstly, look at what Umar was able to do to Corey Sandhagen. Corey was able to get back up to his feet a lot of the time, but Umar had so much grappling success. And then if you look at what I just said about Merab, the way in which he actually doesn't mind when fighters get back up to their feet, if he's still got a body lock on them or some kind of, as long as he's got his hands on them when they get back up to their feet, he doesn't mind that because he'll take them back down. And isn't that exactly what happened with Corey and Umar? So I can understand exactly why Merab would be pushing for this fight. Because for me, right now, this is an early prediction, but I think it's a fairly routine win for Merab. Based on the guy that we just saw fight last night, I just can't really see Corey Sandhagen being the fighter to take that title. I think it would make things a lot more interesting, purely because Corey Sandhagen's a fighter who'll win and lose and win and lose, so it might make the bantamweight division move on a bit more. But really, if this version of Merab is just going to keep fighting the way that he fights, I wouldn't have any complaints about that either. There is an alternative view. Look, it seems that Corey Sandhagen is next. The UFC don't normally stage that kind of thing unless they have it pretty much agreed that Corey will be next. But I think Pantoja is being overlooked massively. Whether it's Pantoja moving up and fighting Merab Dvalishvili, I think this is the time to make a super fight for Merab. Look, Corey Sandhagen, that fight is going to happen, but I just feel as though they're missing a trick with Pantoja. You look at who Pantoja's beaten already in that division. He's beaten all of the top contenders, most of them multiple times. So I think this is a time where you could inject a bit of life into the flyweight division, even though it would be Pantoja coming up. I just think it would maybe put a bit more respect on the flyweight division name, make things interesting there. They probably should have done that fight this time round. Now after there's been another cycle and Corey Sandhagen was able to get another win under his belt against Figueiredo, then that fight would make less sense. But I just think that would have been a good fight to make at the time. Anyway, this has been the 5 things that we learned from Merab Dvalishvili against Sean O'Malley 2. Just as a quick recap, we learned that Sean O'Malley's focus on his takedown defense did pay dividends in terms of the grappling in the first and second round. He looked really good, showed great hip dexterity in getting out of bad positions, so the hip surgery was an obvious success, and he did some really good work getting out of bad positions against Merab. The second thing that we learned is the flip side of that. The fact that maybe O'Malley put too much emphasis in his grappling and his takedown defense in this camp, because his striking didn't look quite as sharp. He was getting caught a lot by Merab, and it did look like a 50-50 on the feet. The third thing that we learned is just the strong will, the mindset of Merab Dvalishvili. Unbreakable, unstoppable, never looked phased, and eventually got O'Malley out of there in the third round, which is the fourth thing that we learned. That third round, possibly the best round of Merab Dvalishvili's career. Tell me if there's a better one. I just think it demonstrated everything that Merab does so well. And I was blown away by it. And the finish, who saw that coming? Finally, the fifth thing that we learned, it would appear as though Corey Sandhagen is next in line to face Merab Dvalishvili. Let me know what you think about that fight, how you think that fight goes down. Hope you've enjoyed this video, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.